The Galactic Council chambers buzzed with the low hum of translated conversations as representatives from 47 species gathered for what many considered a formality. Earth's application for military membership in the Terran Defense Coalition was on the table, and most delegates had already made up their minds. Commander Zexthul of the Korvaxi Empire leaned back in his crystalline chair, his 6 arms folded in a gesture of barely contained amusement. The humans had impressed everyone with their technological adaptations and their surprising resilience during the evaluation period, but military prowess? That remained to be seen. The human delegation will now present their military capabilities assessment, announced the Council's AI moderator, its voice echoing through the vast chamber. General Sarah Chen stepped forward, her crisp blue uniform standing out among the varied attire of the galactic representatives. Behind her, a small team of Earth's finest military personnel waited at attention. Among them stood Corporal Jake Morrison, a quiet man in his 30s whose unremarkable appearance had already drawn several dismissive glances from the alien observers. "Honored delegates," General Chen began, her voice steady and confident, "humanity requests consideration for full military membership in the Terran Defense Coalition. We offer our unique tactical approaches, our adaptability, and our unwavering commitment to protecting innocent life." A ripple of barely suppressed laughter traveled through the Zephyrian delegation. Ambassador Krell, his translucent blue skin shimmering with amusement, activated his speaking crystal. General Chen, with respect, "What could your species possibly offer that we haven't already perfected? The Korvaxi have energy shields that can withstand planetary bombardment. The Vorthak possess weapons that can punch holes through asteroid fields. The Zephyrians have developed matter displacement technology that makes our soldiers nearly untouchable in combat." General Chen's expression remained neutral, though Morrison noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. "We offer precision, Ambassador, the ability to end conflicts with minimal collateral damage." "Precision?" Commander Zexthul's voice carried a tone that made several human delegates shift uncomfortably. "Your species still uses projectile weapons, chemical propellants launching metal fragments. How primitive." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Morrison felt his jaw clench slightly, but his expression remained unchanged. He had heard variations of this dismissal before, during the preliminary demonstrations and cultural exchanges. To most of the galaxy, humans were the new kids on the block, playing with toys while the adults wielded real weapons. "Perhaps," General Chen replied calmly, "you would allow us to demonstrate?" The request sparked immediate interest. Several delegates leaned forward in their seats, while others exchanged glances that clearly communicated their expectation of being entertained by human inadequacy. "A demonstration would be educational," agreed Ambassador Krell. "We have training facilities on the orbital platform that could accommodate such a display." Within an hour, the delegation had moved to the Coalition's premier military training facility, a massive orbital platform that orbited the neutral moon of Keras. The facility was a marvel of galactic engineering, capable of simulating any environment or combat scenario imaginable. The demonstration area was a replica urban environment, complete with buildings, vehicles, and complex terrain features. Holographic civilians moved through the streets, going about simulated daily activities. The scenario was simple: a hostage situation in a heavily populated area with multiple armed insurgents holding innocent lives at risk. "Standard engagement protocol," explained Commander Zexthul as he gestured toward the simulation, "would involve our shock divisions. Watch and learn." The simulation reset, and suddenly the urban environment was filled with Korvaxi soldiers. They moved with incredible speed and efficiency, their energy shields shimmering as they advanced. Energy weapons discharged in controlled bursts, and within minutes, the insurgents were neutralized. The problem was the aftermath. Several buildings showed scorch marks. 3 vehicles had been completely vaporized, and the holographic readout showed 14 civilian casualties from energy weapon overflow and structural collapse. 14 casualties is actually quite good for this scenario, Commander Zexthul noted with satisfaction. The Vorthak typically managed 20 to 30 civilian losses in similar situations. General Chen nodded politely, though Morrison could see the slight tension in her shoulders. Impressive speed and firepower, Commander. Now, if you'll permit us... The simulation reset once more. This time, the human team took position. While the other delegates expected to see a large assault force similar to the Korvaxi display, they were surprised when only 5 humans entered the simulation area. Morrison was among them, carrying what appeared to be an unremarkable rifle. 5 soldiers? Ambassador Krell's confusion was evident in his translated voice. For a scenario that typically requires a full battalion? Sometimes less is more, General Chen replied, watching the monitors intently. The human team moved with a different kind of precision than the Korvaxi had shown. Where the aliens had relied on overwhelming firepower and advanced technology, the humans moved carefully, using cover and concealment. They communicated with subtle hand signals, their movements coordinated but unhurried. Morrison took position on a rooftop approximately 800 meters from the main hostage location. The other team members moved to establish observation points and provide security, but it quickly became clear that Morrison was the primary operator for this demonstration. "What is that human doing?" asked Subcommander Veltar of the Arcturus fleet. "He's not even moving toward the objective." On the monitors, Morrison had settled into position behind his rifle, a device that looked almost crude compared to the gleaming energy weapons the galactic forces employed. He was perfectly still, his eye pressed to an optical scope, his breathing slow and controlled. "He appears to be waiting," observed Commander Zexthul with growing confusion. "Does he not understand the urgency of the scenario? Those insurgents could execute hostages at any moment." The delegates watched in bewilderment as minutes passed. The other human soldiers remained in their positions, creating a security perimeter, but taking no aggressive action. Morrison continued to lie motionless behind his weapon, occasionally making minute adjustments to his position. "Is he malfunctioning?" asked Ambassador Krell. "Perhaps their primitive communication systems have failed?" Then, without warning, Morrison's rifle fired. The sound was sharp and distinct, entirely different from the hum and crackle of energy weapons. A single projectile, a simple piece of shaped metal, traveled the distance to the target building in less than a second. The result was immediate and shocking. Through the simulation's monitoring system, the delegates could see that one of the insurgent leaders had been eliminated with perfect precision. The projectile had traveled through a window between 2 hostages and struck its target with surgical accuracy. No energy spillover, no collateral damage, no structural harm to the building. "Interesting," Commander Zexthul admitted, though his tone suggested he was not particularly impressed. "Though I fail to see how eliminating one target solves the overall situation. There are still 7 insurgents remaining, and now they're aware they're under attack." Morrison fired again, and then again. Each shot was separated by several seconds, each one carefully aimed and precisely executed. With methodical patience, he eliminated the insurgents one by one, his bullets finding their targets through windows, around obstacles, and between innocent bystanders with an accuracy that defied the galactic delegates' understanding of projectile physics. Within 10 minutes, the scenario was complete. All insurgents eliminated, all hostages safe, 0 civilian casualties and no property damage beyond a few small holes in windows. The entire operation had been conducted by essentially 1 soldier with what the galactic community considered primitive technology. The silence in the observation chamber was profound. Several delegates were reviewing the sensor data, trying to understand what they had witnessed. The precision required for such shots was theoretically possible, but practically impossible for most species, even with their advanced targeting systems. How? Ambassador Krell's question was simple, but carried the weight of genuine confusion. Our computers suggest that several of those shots required accuracy levels beyond the capability of projectile weapons. Morrison stood up from his position, his rifle secured across his back. Through the communication system, his calm voice reached the observation chamber. Wind speed 2.3 meters per second from the southeast. Temperature differential between my position and target zone creating minor thermal drift. Humidity at 68% affecting air density. Target movement patterns observed and calculated. 847 meters to primary target, 812 to secondary, 791 to tertiary. He rattled off the data with the same casual tone someone might use to discuss the weather. To Morrison, these were simply variables to be calculated and adjusted for, factors that any competent marksman would naturally consider. "You calculated all of those variables manually?" Sub-Commander Veltar asked, incredulous. "Without computer assistance?" "Yes, ma'am," Morrison replied simply. Commander Zexthul activated his communication system, his voice carrying a new note of respect. "Corporal Morrison, our records indicate that your rifle fires simple metal projectiles using chemical propulsion. How is such precision possible with such basic technology?" Morrison appeared to consider the question for a moment before responding. "Respectfully, Commander, the technology isn't what makes the shot. It's the person behind the weapon." This response seemed to perplex the delegates even more. In galactic society, warfare had evolved far beyond personal skill. Battles were won through superior technology, overwhelming firepower, and advanced AI-assisted targeting systems. The concept that individual ability could triumph over technological superiority was almost incomprehensible. "Surely you use some form of targeting assistance," insisted Ambassador Krell. "Computer-calculated trajectory, predictive algorithms, environmental sensors?" "No, sir," Morrison replied. "Just training, practice, and experience." General Chen watched the delegates' reactions with interest. She could see the exact moment when their dismissive attitudes began to shift toward something resembling concern. The demonstration had been designed to showcase not just Morrison's exceptional skills, but the broader principle behind human military philosophy. "If I may explain," General Chen interjected, "Corporal Morrison represents something that may be unique among galactic civilizations. We call it individual excellence. While our technology may not match yours, our training methods produce soldiers capable of achieving what your computers consider impossible." Commander Zexthul studied the data readouts with growing unease. His species had relied on technological supremacy for so long that the concept of personal skill superseding artificial assistance was almost alien to them. "This demonstration was impressive, General, but surely this level of performance is exceptional among your species." "Corporal Morrison is highly skilled," General Chen acknowledged, "but he's not unique. Every branch of our military emphasizes individual competency alongside technological proficiency. We have thousands of soldiers with similar capabilities." The implications of this statement rippled through the observation chamber. If humans could achieve such precision with primitive weapons, what might they be capable of with access to galactic technology? And if they had thousands of soldiers with comparable abilities, "There must be some limitation," Sub-Commander Veltar insisted. "Maximum range, environmental factors, rate of fire?" Morrison's voice came through the communication system again, still carrying that same calm, matter-of-fact tone. "I've made confirmed shots at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Environmental factors are just variables to be calculated and adjusted for. As for rate of fire, that depends on the tactical situation and target priority." Ambassador Krell exchanged glances with his fellow delegates. 2,000 meters was beyond the effective range of many energy weapons, particularly in atmospheric conditions. The idea that a human with a chemical-propelled projectile weapon could engage targets at such distances was deeply unsettling. Perhaps, Commander Zexthul suggested, his earlier condescension replaced by cautious respect, we should discuss the practical applications of such capabilities within coalition operations. General Chen smiled slightly. The demonstration had achieved exactly what she had hoped. It had forced the galactic community to reconsider their assumptions about human military value. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. The real test would come when humanity had to prove itself in actual combat alongside their galactic allies. We look forward to that discussion, Commander, she replied. Humanity is eager to contribute to galactic security in whatever capacity best serves the Coalition's needs. As the delegates filed out of the observation chamber, their conversations had taken on a notably different tone. The casual dismissal of human capabilities had been replaced by careful consideration and, in some cases, genuine concern about what other surprises the newest species might bring to the galactic military landscape. Morrison packed his equipment with the same methodical care he had shown during the demonstration. To him, it had been a routine training exercise, no different from hundreds of others he had completed throughout his career. He had no way of knowing that his simple display of marksmanship had fundamentally altered the galaxy's perception of human military potential. The invitation to join the Coalition's military forces came through official channels 3 days later. Humanity had been accepted, not as junior partners or support personnel, but as full members with specialized tactical roles. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous weapon was not the most advanced technology, but the person who wielded it with skill, precision, and unwavering determination. But acceptance was only the beginning. Soon, both humans and their galactic allies would discover just how far human capabilities could stretch when put to the ultimate test. The Coalition frigate Harmony's edge cut through the void between star systems, its hull bearing the scars of 3 months of continuous combat operations. Inside the ship's briefing room, tension filled the recycled air as commanders from 5 different species studied holographic displays of their next target. The war against the hegemony had been raging for 8 standard months, and progress had been frustratingly slow. The enemy had proven more adaptable and resourceful than anyone had anticipated, turning what should have been a quick police action into a grinding conflict that stretched Coalition resources to their limits. Corporal Jake Morrison sat quietly in the back of the briefing room, his presence barely acknowledged by most of the alien officers. In the 3 months since humanity had joined the Coalition forces, human troops had been relegated primarily to support roles, their primitive equipment deemed unsuitable for frontline combat operations. The situation is deteriorating rapidly, Commander Zexthul announced, his 6 arms manipulating multiple data streams simultaneously. The hegemony has established a fortress complex on Kepler 442b, controlling the entire system's shipping lanes. Our assault forces have been repelled 3 times, with casualties mounting into the thousands. The holographic display showed an imposing military installation built into the side of a mountain range. Defensive positions covered every approach, with overlapping fields of fire from energy weapons platforms that could reduce attacking ships to cosmic dust in seconds. Intelligence indicates the fortress is commanded by General Vexnar, one of the hegemony's most experienced tactical minds, continued Subcommander Veltar. His defensive strategy has proven nearly impregnable. Our computer models suggest a successful assault would require forces we simply cannot spare from other fronts. Morrison studied the tactical display with professional interest, his trained eye automatically identifying fields of fire, dead zones, and potential sniper positions. The fortress was indeed formidable. But like all defensive positions, it had been designed with certain assumptions about how attacks would be conducted. "What's the primary defensive weakness?" asked Captain Morden of the Arcturus fleet, his scaled features creased with concern. Commander Zexthol highlighted a section of the fortress. The command center is heavily shielded and protected by multiple redundant systems. General Vexnar personally oversees operations from this location, but reaching him would require penetrating 7 layers of defenses. Our assault specialists estimate a minimum of 15,000 troops would be needed for a successful breakthrough, with acceptable casualties projected at 60%. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. The coalition simply didn't have 15,000 troops to spare, and a 60% casualty rate was far from acceptable by any military standard. Alternative strategies? Inquired Ambassador Krell, who had joined the mission as a diplomatic observer. Orbital bombardment is not viable due to the civilian population in the surrounding cities, Sub-Commander Veltar replied. The hegemony has strategically positioned their fortress to make large-scale attacks impossible without massive collateral damage. Morrison shifted slightly in his seat, a movement that caught Commander Zexthol's attention. Corporal Morrison, you've been unusually quiet. Do humans have any insights to offer regarding this tactical situation? The question carried a tone that suggested the commander expected little of value from the human representative. Morrison stood slowly, his eyes still focused on the holographic display. Sir, requesting permission to approach the tactical display? Commander Zexthol gestured approval with one of his arms, clearly curious about what the human might contribute to a problem that had stumped the Coalition's best military minds. Morrison moved to the display and began manipulating the controls with surprising proficiency. The view shifted and zoomed, focusing on specific sections of the fortress complex. His movements were precise and purposeful, as if he were examining terrain he had walked personally. The fortress design follows standard hegemony defensive doctrine, Morrison began, his voice carrying the same calm, analytical tone that had impressed the delegates during his demonstration. Overlapping fields of fire, redundant power systems, multiple escape routes for command personnel, very thorough. Yes, Commander Zexthol agreed, though his tone suggested he was waiting for Morrison to reach some point, which is why conventional assault has proven ineffective. Morrison highlighted a specific area of the mountainside, approximately 2,000 meters from the main fortress complex. This ridgeline offers good concealment and multiple firing positions. The elevation provides clear lines of sight to key defensive positions. Several of the alien officers exchanged glances. Captain Morden activated his translation matrix, confusion evident in his electronic voice. Corporal, that position is well beyond effective range of any infantry weapon. Our tactical computers classify it as irrelevant to assault planning. For energy weapons, yes, sir, Morrison agreed, but projectile weapons operate under different physics. The room fell silent as the implications of Morrison's statement began to sink in. Sub-Commander Veltar leaned forward in her seat, her crystalline features reflecting the holographic light. You're suggesting a single sniper could affect the outcome of this siege? Not affect, ma'am, Morrison replied quietly. End it. The audacity of the statement sparked immediate responses from several officers. Commander Zexthol's translation matrix conveyed sharp disbelief. Corporal, this fortress contains over 10,000 enemy soldiers, automated defense systems, and one of the hegemony's most capable commanders. You're suggesting that one human with a projectile weapon could accomplish what our combined fleets cannot? Morrison turned from the display to face the assembled officers, his expression unchanged. Yes, sir. The certainty in his voice was more unsettling than any boast would have been. Captain Morden accessed his tactical database, running calculations through the ship's computer systems. Morrison, our analysis indicates that General Vexnar never exposes himself to potential fire. He commands from within the most heavily protected section of the fortress. He's also a career military officer, Morrison replied. which means he has habits, patterns, and pride. Men like him don't stay locked in bunkers indefinitely. They need to see their defenses, inspect their troops, maintain morale through personal presence. Sub-Commander Veltar studied the human with growing interest. You're proposing to wait for a target of opportunity? I'm proposing to create one, Morrison corrected. Psychological warfare is part of precision marksmanship. Make him think he's safe, then demonstrate otherwise. Commander Zexthul manipulated the display, showing the dense defensive networks surrounding the fortress. Even assuming you could achieve the impossible and eliminate General Vexnar, the fortress would simply continue under automated control. The defensive systems don't require his personal oversight. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. True, but they require coordination. Military installations like this depend on centralized command for optimal efficiency. Remove the command structure and you create opportunities for conventional assault forces. You're talking about a shot that our computers classify as impossible, Captain Mordun stated flatly. The range, the atmospheric interference, the target movement, the defensive countermeasures. Respectfully, Captain, Morrison interrupted gently. Your computers are calculating for energy weapons and mechanical targeting systems. They're not accounting for human capabilities. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Ambassador Krell activated his communication system, his voice carrying diplomatic caution. Corporal Morrison, the risk of failure in this scenario extends far beyond military casualties. If you attempt this mission and fail, the hegemony will know that coalition forces are operating in the system. They'll strengthen their defenses and possibly execute civilian hostages. I understand the stakes, sir, Morrison replied simply. Commander Zexthul studied the human for a long moment, clearly wrestling with a decision that went against everything his tactical training had taught him. The idea of risking a crucial mission on the abilities of one soldier with primitive equipment challenged fundamental assumptions about military effectiveness. Corporal Morrison, he said finally, explain exactly what you would require for this mission. Morrison returned to the tactical display, his movements becoming more animated as he detailed his plan. Insertion via stealth transport to this landing zone approximately 5 kilometers from the target position. I'll need 48 hours to establish position, conduct reconnaissance, and wait for optimal conditions. Standard battlefield equipment, with ammunition modifications for extreme range engagement. Support personnel? Inquired Sub-Commander Veltar. None required, ma'am. Additional personnel would increase detection risk without providing tactical advantage. The alien officers exchanged glances that clearly communicated their disbelief. Captain Mordun activated multiple data streams, his scaled features reflecting the glow of holographic calculations. Our stealth transports can deliver you to the specified coordinates, but extraction under combat conditions would be extremely difficult. Extraction can wait until after the fortress falls, Morrison replied matter-of-factly. Commander Zexthul's 6 arms moved in a pattern that indicated deep consideration. You're proposing a suicide mission, Corporal. Even assuming success, your chances of surviving the aftermath are negligible. With respect, Commander, that's not accurate. Once General Vexnar is eliminated and the fortress command structure disrupted, conventional assault forces can exploit the confusion to establish foothold positions. During the chaos of battle, extraction becomes much more feasible. The logic was sound, but the entire plan hinged on achieving something that galactic military science considered impossible. Ambassador Krell accessed his diplomatic protocols, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Commander Zexthul, he interjected, perhaps we should consider alternative strategies that don't rely on theoretical capabilities. Morrison's response was immediate and delivered with quiet confidence. Sir, requesting permission to review the tactical records from the orbital platform demonstration. Commander Zexthul manipulated his control interface, bringing up the recorded data from Morrison's marksmanship display months earlier. The sensor readings and computer analysis filled multiple holographic windows, showing impossible accuracy achieved through primitive means. The conditions I demonstrated under were actually more challenging than this mission scenario, Morrison stated calmly. Controlled environment versus combat conditions, yes, but the fundamental principles remain the same. Calculate the variables, adjust for conditions, execute with precision. Subcommander Veltar studied the demonstration data with renewed interest. The ranges are comparable, but the stakes make it more important to succeed, Morrison finished, which is why I will succeed. The certainty in his voice wasn't bravado or false confidence. It was the calm assurance of a professional who understood his capabilities and limitations better than any computer analysis could calculate. Commander Zexthul made his decision with visible reluctance. Very well, Corporal Morrison. You'll have your mission. But understand that if you fail, the consequences extend far beyond your own life. Thousands of coalition soldiers are counting on this operation to break the stalemate. I understand, sir, Morrison replied simply. I won't fail. As the briefing concluded and officers began filing out to prepare for the mission, Ambassador Krell lingered behind with Commander Zexthul. Their conversation was conducted in low tones, but Morrison could sense their uncertainty. 3 hours later, Morrison sat in the cramped confines of a coalition stealth transport, conducting final equipment checks with methodical precision. His rifle had been modified for extreme range engagement, the scope calibrated for the atmospheric conditions of Kepler 442b, and his ammunition selected for optimal ballistic performance across the projected distances. The other passengers, a mix of coalition species preparing for their own missions, watched the human with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. The story of his impossible marksmanship demonstration had spread throughout the fleet, but few truly believed that one soldier could accomplish what entire armies had failed to achieve. Morrison ignored the attention, his mind already focused on the mission ahead. In his experience, the most important part of any sniper engagement happened long before the trigger was pulled. Success depended on patience, preparation, and the absolute conviction that when the moment came, he would not miss. The transport shuddered slightly as it entered the planet's atmosphere, beginning its stealthy approach to the drop zone. Through the small viewport, Morrison could see the fortress complex in the distance, its lights glowing against the mountainside like a beacon of enemy defiance. Soon, he would discover whether human capability could triumph over galactic impossibility. The war's outcome might well depend on a single shot, fired by one man with a rifle that most of the galaxy considered obsolete. But Morrison had no doubts about what would happen when that moment came. He had trained for this his entire career, and he was ready. The pre-dawn darkness of Kepler 442b wrapped around Morrison like a familiar embrace as he settled into his final firing position. 47 hours had passed since his insertion, and every minute had been spent in careful preparation for this moment. The ridgeline he had selected offered everything he needed: concealment, multiple escape routes, and most importantly, a clear line of sight to the fortress complex 2,137 meters away. His portable weather station indicated wind conditions of 3.2 meters per second from the northwest, with atmospheric pressure slightly below Earth normal but well within acceptable parameters. Through his scope, Morrison could see the hegemony fortress in stark detail. The complex was a masterpiece of defensive engineering, its weapons platforms and shield generators creating overlapping fields of protection that had already destroyed 3 coalition assault fleets. Automated systems tracked constantly across the approaches, their sensors sweeping for any sign of enemy activity. But those sensors were designed to detect energy signatures, ship movements, and large troop formations. They weren't calibrated for one man lying motionless on a distant ridge, his equipment generating no electronic emissions, and his body heat masked by thermal dampening gear. Morrison had spent the previous day observing the fortress routine through his scope, noting patrol patterns, shift changes, and the movement of key personnel. General Vexinar had appeared twice, both times conducting inspections of the outer defensive positions. The hegemony commander was cautious but not paranoid, maintaining the hands-on leadership style that had made him effective on multiple battlefields. That leadership style would be his downfall. The communication device nestled against Morrison's ear crackled softly with Coalition fleet traffic. Commander Zexthul's forces were holding position at the edge of the system, waiting for the signal that would either begin their assault or confirm the mission's failure. The weight of expectation was enormous, but Morrison had learned long ago to compartmentalize external pressure and focus solely on the task at hand. At 0547 local time, movement in the fortress caught his attention. Through the scope, he could see increased activity around the command center, with hegemony soldiers moving with the purposeful urgency that indicated their leader was preparing for another inspection tour. Morrison controlled his breathing, allowing his heart rate to settle into the steady rhythm that marked optimal firing conditions. His finger rested lightly on the trigger, not applying pressure but simply maintaining contact with the weapon. Everything now depended on patience and the ability to recognize the perfect moment when it presented itself. 23 minutes later, that moment arrived. General Vexinar emerged from the command center flanked by 2 aides-de-camps and a security detail of 4 soldiers. The group moved toward the eastern defensive platform, following a route that Morrison had observed during the previous day's reconnaissance. For approximately 15 seconds, the general's path would take him across an open space between 2 defensive structures. Morrison's calculations ran through his mind with automatic precision. Range, 2,137 meters. Wind speed, 3.2 meters per second, northwest. Temperature differential, minimal. Target movement, predictable forward motion at approximately 1.8 meters per second. Time to target, 2.94 seconds. The general and his entourage approached the open space. Morrison's breathing slowed to the point where his chest barely moved. His vision narrowed until the scope's field of view became his entire universe. External sounds faded away, leaving only the steady beating of his heart and the whisper of wind across the ridge. General Vexinar stepped into the open space. Morrison's finger applied steady pressure to the trigger, the motion so smooth and controlled that the rifle's discharge came as almost a surprise. The weapon's recoil was absorbed by his body positioning, and he immediately worked the bolt action to chamber a second round while maintaining sight picture on the target area. The projectile's flight time seemed eternal, though Morrison knew intellectually that it lasted less than 3 seconds. Through his scope, he watched General Vexinar take 2 more steps before the bullet found its target with surgical precision. The hegemony commander dropped immediately, his body armor offering no protection against the kinetic force of the precisely placed shot. The effect on the fortress was immediate and dramatic. Alarm systems activated throughout the complex, and soldiers began rushing toward their commander's position. But General Vexinar was beyond any assistance they could provide. Morrison's shot had been aimed not merely to wound or incapacitate, but to ensure permanent elimination of the target. Morrison spoke quietly into his communication device. "Control, this is Overwatch. Target neutralized. Begin assault sequence." Commander Zexthul's response carried a mixture of disbelief and professional admiration. "Confirmed, Overwatch. Assault forces moving to attack positions. Outstanding work." But Morrison's mission was far from complete. The elimination of General Vexinar was only the beginning of what he had planned for the fortress complex. As chaos erupted around the command center, he shifted his aim to secondary targets that his reconnaissance had identified as critical to the defensive network's coordination. The fortress's automated systems were impressive, but they relied on organic oversight to function at maximum efficiency. Morrison began systematically eliminating key personnel whose deaths would create cascading failures in the defensive network. A communications coordinator responsible for coordinating between defensive platforms, a sensor technician whose expertise was crucial for tracking incoming threats, a weapon systems supervisor whose personal oversight kept the energy weapon platforms operating at peak accuracy. Each shot was calculated with the same precision as the first, and each target was eliminated before they could effectively respond to the developing crisis. Morrison wasn't simply sniping individual enemies. He was conducting psychological warfare on an institutional level, creating panic and confusion that would multiply the effectiveness of the incoming coalition assault. As the coalition fleet emerged from hyperspace and began their attack run, the fortress's response was noticeably degraded. Energy weapon platforms that should have been firing in coordinated patterns instead operated independently, creating gaps in their defensive coverage. Communication between different sections of the complex became sporadic and disorganized. Command decisions that should have been made instantly instead required precious seconds as subordinate officers tried to establish new chains of authority. Morrison continued providing precise fire support, eliminating targets of opportunity as they presented themselves. A squad of reinforcements attempting to reach a disabled weapon platform, an officer trying to coordinate defensive fire from an exposed position, a technical specialist whose expertise was needed to repair damaged systems. The coalition assault, which computer models had predicted would require massive forces and accept enormous casualties, instead proceeded with surprising efficiency. Ships that should have been destroyed by concentrated defensive fire instead found gaps in the coverage that allowed them to establish orbital positions and begin landing troops on the fortress's outer perimeters. Through his scope, Morrison could see coalition soldiers advancing through defensive positions that should have been impregnable. The combination of precision elimination of key personnel and the psychological impact of their commander's death had created exactly the kind of chaos that conventional assault forces could exploit. But the hegemony defenders were not helpless. As the battle progressed, surviving officers began adapting to their new circumstances, reorganizing defensive positions and attempting to coordinate effective resistance. Morrison realized that his window of maximum effectiveness was limited, and he began focusing on targets that would have the greatest long-term impact on the fortress's ability to resist. A group of senior officers who had gathered to coordinate the defense fell to 3 precisely aimed shots fired in rapid succession. An automated defense coordinator who was attempting to reprogram the weapon platforms to compensate for their reduced personnel was eliminated before he could complete his work. A communications specialist who had managed to establish contact with hegemony reinforcements was silenced before he could provide detailed intelligence about the coalition assault. As the coalition forces established footholds within the fortress perimeter, Morrison's role began transitioning from strategic elimination of key targets to tactical support of advancing troops. His elevated position and comprehensive view of the battlefield allowed him to provide precision fire support that was impossible from within the combat zone. Coalition soldiers who found themselves pinned down by enemy fire suddenly discovered their opponents eliminated by shots that seemed to come from nowhere. Defensive positions that should have required costly frontal assaults instead fell silent as their occupants were eliminated by precisely aimed fire from impossible ranges. Hegemony troops attempting to establish new defensive lines found their efforts disrupted by the systematic elimination of anyone who attempted to take leadership roles. The psychological effect on the remaining hegemony defenders was devastating. They were facing an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't locate, and couldn't effectively counter. Every time an officer attempted to organize resistance, he was eliminated before he could implement his plans. Every defensive position that relied on individual expertise found itself suddenly unmanned. The fortress's defenders began experiencing the kind of demoralization that comes from facing an opponent who seems to possess supernatural capabilities. Commander Zexthul's voice crackled through Morrison's communication device as Coalition forces reached the fortress's main command center. Overwatch. This is Control. We've secured the primary objective. Defensive resistance is collapsing throughout the complex. Your fire support has been extraordinary. Morrison continued scanning for targets, his professional instincts keeping him focused despite the obvious success of the mission. Control, this is Overwatch. Continuing target elimination until area is secure. Negative, Overwatch, Commander Zexthul replied. Begin extraction procedures. You've accomplished more than anyone thought possible. As Coalition forces completed their occupation of the fortress, Morrison began the methodical process of packing his equipment and preparing for extraction. The mission had been successful beyond anyone's expectations, but he knew that this was only one battle in a larger war. The techniques he had demonstrated here would need to be refined and applied to other strategic situations. But as he secured his rifle and prepared to move to the extraction point, Morrison allowed himself a moment of professional satisfaction. The galaxy had assumed that human capabilities were limited by their primitive technology. Today had demonstrated that sometimes the most advanced weapon was simply a skilled individual who understood how to use what he had. The extraction went smoothly, with Coalition forces providing security as Morrison made his way to the designated pickup zone. As the transport lifted off from the planet's surface, he could see the conquered fortress below, its lights now displaying Coalition colors instead of hegemony symbols. The return journey to the fleet gave Morrison time to decompress and process what had occurred. In the span of a few hours, he had fundamentally altered the course of the war in this sector. The hegemony's control of the shipping lanes had been broken, and Coalition forces now controlled a strategic position that would serve as a base for further operations. But perhaps more importantly, the battle had demonstrated human military capabilities in a way that no simulation or demonstration could achieve. The galaxy had witnessed what one trained human soldier could accomplish with skill, determination, and the right opportunity. When Morrison finally returned to the Harmony's edge, he found the ship's crew treating him with a mixture of awe and respect that was entirely different from their previous polite dismissal. The story of his impossible shots and their strategic impact had already spread throughout the Coalition fleet, establishing a reputation that would follow him for the rest of the war. Commander Zexthul greeted him personally in the hangar bay, the Corvaxi's 6 arms moving in a pattern that Morrison had learned indicated deep respect. Corporal Morrison, on behalf of the Coalition Command, I want to express our gratitude for what you accomplished today. Your actions may well have shortened this war by months. Morrison nodded acknowledgement, but kept his response characteristically understated. Just doing my job, sir. Happy to help however I can. As he made his way through the ship toward his quarters, Morrison passed groups of alien soldiers who watched him with expressions ranging from amazement to something approaching reverence. Word of his achievement had spread beyond mere tactical success to become something approaching legend. But Morrison knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was learning that humans brought capabilities to warfare that couldn't be measured by technological advancement or firepower statistics. The hegemony would adapt to this new reality, and new challenges would require new solutions. The war was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted in ways that no one had anticipated. Humanity had proven that sometimes the most primitive weapons, wielded with skill and determination, could accomplish what the most advanced technology could not. The galaxy would never underestimate human military capability again, and Morrison was ready for whatever came next.